My wealthy girlfriend refused to continue our relationship after learning my mom and dad work low-paying jobs. But months later, I bought out her mother's business chain. Now her parents work for me, and my phone won't stop ringing with her apology calls. Hey Reddit, looking back 8 months ago, I genuinely thought I had everything figured out. My name is Dylan Chen, I'm 26 years old, and I had been dating Victoria Sterling for almost 2 years. I honestly believed we had a real future together, the kind of relationship that leads to marriage and building a life side by side. Victoria came from what people call old money, the kind of wealth where her family had been affluent for generations. She had a trust fund that could probably buy a small country, along with social connections that opened doors I didn't even know existed. The Sterling name carried weight in circles I'd only read about in business magazines. As for me, I'm the son of Robert Chen, who has been fixing cars in Chicago for 30 years, and Linda Chen, who has been cleaning houses in the downtown area for just as long. My parents are incredibly hardworking people who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. They're the kind of people who take pride in honest work and treat everyone with respect, regardless of their bank account. Here's the thing that made our relationship feel so genuine at the beginning. I never hid my background from Victoria. From day one, I was completely upfront about where I came from and who my parents were. I never tried to pretend I was something I wasn't or embellish my family's circumstances. We met at a tech conference in Boston, where I was pitching my startup, Dataflow Systems, to potential investors. I had been working on this data management company for years, and this conference represented a huge opportunity to get in front of people who could help take it to the next level. Victoria was there with her Northwestern MBA friends, networking and playing the part of the sophisticated heiress that she was born to be. When she approached me after my presentation, I was honestly starstruck. Victoria was absolutely gorgeous. Long dark hair, designer everything, and this natural confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or wonder where your next meal is coming from. She carried herself like someone who belonged in every room she entered. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, and I was amazed by how engaged she seemed. She asked genuinely smart questions about our data management technology, wanted to understand the market we were targeting, and seemed fascinated by the technical aspects of what we were building. When I mentioned growing up in Chicago and talked about my parents' work, she didn't bat an eye or seem uncomfortable at all. We exchanged numbers that night, and by the end of that week, we were practically inseparable. For almost 2 years, everything between us felt perfect. Victoria would visit my tiny apartment in the suburbs without complaint, and I'd spend weekends at her family's massive estate in Lake Forest. She never once said anything negative about the train rides to see me, never made comments about my secondhand furniture, or the fact that my place was probably smaller than her walk-in closet. When she met my parents briefly at a coffee shop about 6 months into our relationship, she was polite and charming. My mom, Linda, immediately loved her, and even my usually skeptical dad, Robert, admitted she seemed like genuinely good people. For a while, it felt like we were building something real together, something that could bridge the gap between our very different worlds. But despite the surface-level harmony, there was always this underlying tension that I couldn't quite place my finger on. Victoria's friends were consistently polite to me whenever we attended social gatherings or parties, but I could sense the condescension lurking beneath their practiced smiles. There was a particular tone they'd use when asking what I did for work, like they expected me to say I was still figuring out my career path or working some entry-level job while I got my life together. When I would explain Dataflow and go into detail about how we were revolutionizing data management systems for mid-sized companies, describing our innovative approach to streamlining information processing, they would nod politely for exactly the right amount of time before smoothly changing the subject. The conversation would inevitably pivot to their latest vacation in Monaco, their friend's elaborate destination wedding in Tuscany, or some exclusive event they'd attended at a private club I'd never heard of. Victoria's parents, Charles and Catherine Sterling, were a completely different story entirely. I had met them a handful of times at various family gatherings and holiday celebrations, and while they weren't openly hostile toward me, there was an unmistakable coolness in their interactions. Charles had this particular way of looking at me, like I was a temporary phase his daughter was going through, something she'd eventually outgrow once she came to her senses. Catherine would smile politely and ask surface-level questions about what she always referred to as my little computer business, as if Dataflow was some hobby I was tinkering with in my spare time. Before I could even finish explaining what we did, she would pivot the conversation to discuss Victoria's trust fund investments, or their latest acquisition for Sterling Holdings, their massive real estate empire that had been in the family for decades. Despite all of these subtle signs and underlying tensions, I was actually planning to propose to Victoria. I had spent weeks picking out the perfect ring. Nothing too flashy because I knew her style leaned toward classic elegance rather than ostentatious displays of wealth. I found this beautiful vintage piece in Little Italy that reminded me of her grandmother's engagement ring, which she had shown me in old family photos while telling stories about her family's history. I thought it would be meaningful to choose something that connected to her family legacy while still being uniquely ours. I was convinced that what we had was strong enough to overcome any obstacles that our different backgrounds might present. I believed that love could bridge any gap, and I was ready to spend the rest of my life proving that to both of our families and social circles. Then came the dinner that completely changed everything between us. It was a Wednesday evening in December, and Victoria had been dropping hints for months that she wanted to meet my parents properly, not just the brief coffee shop encounter we'd had earlier in our relationship. She kept saying she wanted to see where I grew up, to understand my roots better and get a real sense of the environment that shaped me into the person I became. I was absolutely thrilled by her interest. Finally, I thought to myself, she wants to really be part of my world instead of just tolerating it. I decided to plan a casual dinner at my childhood home on the South Side. Nothing fancy or elaborate, just my mom's famous beef stew, some good wine, and quality time for everyone to get to know each other better. I made sure to warn Victoria that it would be very different from what she was accustomed to in her world, but she insisted she was genuinely excited about the opportunity. My parents went completely all out to make the evening special. My mom, Linda, spent the entire day cooking from scratch, preparing her signature beef stew that had been perfected over decades of family dinners. She made fresh cornbread, a Caesar salad with homemade dressing, and all the little touches that turn a simple meal into something memorable. My dad, Robert, actually took the afternoon off from his auto shop, which he practically never does, to help set up the house and make sure everything was absolutely perfect. They were both so excited to finally spend real, meaningful time with the woman their son was serious about. I could see how much effort they put into making Victoria feel welcome and accepted into our family. They had heard me talk about her for almost 2 years, and this felt like an important milestone in our relationship. When Victoria arrived that evening, she looked stunning as always, perfectly put together in a way that seemed effortless, but probably took an hour to achieve. However, I noticed she seemed unusually tense from the moment she walked through the door. She kept checking her phone repeatedly and looking around our modest 2-bedroom house like she was taking a detailed inventory of everything she saw, from the secondhand furniture to the family photos covering the walls. Still, dinner started well enough. My parents were incredibly warm and welcoming, asking thoughtful questions about her work and her family, sharing funny stories about my childhood that I probably would have preferred they keep to themselves. My dad told his favorite story about teaching me to change brake pads when I was 13 years old, describing how I got so completely covered in grease that my mom made me shower twice before she'd let me come to the dinner table. My mom brought out photo albums filled with embarrassing high school pictures that every parent loves to share with their children's significant others. There were photos of me in braces, awkward school dance pictures, and shots from various family vacations to places like Wisconsin Dells and Lake Geneva. Modest family trips that meant the world to us at the time. Victoria laughed in all the right places, complimented my mother's cooking enthusiastically, and seemed to be genuinely enjoying herself throughout most of the evening. But I could sense something was off about her demeanor. She kept deflecting whenever my parents asked specific questions about her family's business, giving vague answers about investments in real estate without going into any real detail. When my mom mentioned how proud she was of her house cleaning clients and how some families had become like extended family to her over the years, describing the children she'd watched grow up and the relationships she'd built through her work, I noticed Victoria's smile became strained and forced. It was subtle, but I knew her well enough to recognize when she was uncomfortable. The breaking point came when my dad mentioned a specific client whose luxury car he'd been working on recently. "You know Dylan," he said, wiping sauce from his beard with genuine enthusiasm. "Mrs. Johnson's BMW had the exact same issue you helped me diagnose last month. That engineering degree of yours really comes in handy even in the shop." He was absolutely beaming with pride as he spoke, the way he always did when he talked about how my formal education complemented his decades of hands-on experience with automobiles. My father had always been incredibly proud of the fact that despite our different educational backgrounds, we could work together and learn from each other. He loved telling people how his son, the college graduate, could still get his hands dirty and solve real problems alongside him. It was one of his favorite topics of conversation, and it represented everything beautiful about our relationship: mutual respect, shared knowledge, and the understanding that intelligence comes in many different forms. But as my dad spoke, I saw Victoria's face completely change. Something cold and calculating flickered in her eyes, an expression I had never seen before in our nearly 2 years together. It wasn't disgust exactly, but rather a kind of horrified realization, as if she was truly seeing my family's reality for the first time and understanding what it meant for her own image and social standing. The evening ended cordially enough on the surface. Victoria thanked my parents graciously for the dinner, complimented my mom's cooking one final time, and we exchanged warm goodbyes at the door. My parents were thrilled with how the evening had gone, talking excitedly about how lovely Victoria was and how happy they were that I had found someone so wonderful. They had no idea what I had observed in her expression during those final moments. But during the drive back to downtown Chicago, Victoria was unusually quiet. The comfortable conversation that normally flowed between us was replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to fill every inch of the car. I could feel the tension radiating from her, though I couldn't yet understand what had caused such a dramatic shift in her mood. "Everything okay?" I asked as we sat in heavy traffic, trying to break through the awkward silence that had settled between us. "Fine," she replied, but her tone said absolutely everything except fine. There was a coldness in her voice that I had never heard before, a distance that made me feel like I was talking to a stranger instead of the woman I had been planning to propose to. It wasn't until we got back to her pristine apartment in one of downtown's most exclusive buildings that she finally decided to speak her mind. We were standing in her immaculate living room, the one with the Italian marble coffee table that probably cost more than most people's cars and the original Monet hanging casually on the wall, like it was a poster from a college dorm room. Victoria turned to me with an expression I had never seen before: cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with. "Dylan, we need to talk," she said, and those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. Every guy knows that those 4 words mean your entire world is about to come crashing down around you. There's no recovering from "we need to talk" delivered in that particular tone of voice. I felt my stomach drop as I prepared myself for whatever devastating revelation was about to follow. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately," Victoria continued, beginning to pace toward her floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. "About our future, about whether we're really compatible in the long term." Her voice was measured and controlled, as if she had been rehearsing this conversation in her head for days or even weeks. "What do you mean?" I asked, though something deep in my gut already knew exactly where this conversation was heading. There was a finality in her tone that suggested this wasn't a discussion about working through our differences. This was a verdict that had already been decided. She turned back to face me, and her expression was colder than I had ever seen it in our entire relationship. Gone was any trace of the warmth, affection, or intimacy we had shared over the past 2 years. "Tonight really opened my eyes," she said with clinical detachment. "I thought you came from a good family, Dylan. I mean, I knew your parents weren't wealthy, but I assumed they were at least professional, educated people." I felt like I had been punched directly in the stomach. The words hit me with such unexpected force that I actually took a step backward. "Victoria, what are you talking about?" I managed to say, my voice sounding strangled even to my own ears. "My parents are absolutely amazing people. They work their asses off every single day to give me opportunities they never had themselves." "Your father fixes cars, Dylan," she said, as if she was pointing out some fundamental character flaw that I had been trying to hide from her. "Your mother cleans houses." The way she said it, with such obvious disdain and contempt, made it clear that in her mind, these were not simply jobs, they were moral failings. "I can't introduce you to my social circle knowing that," she continued, her voice growing more confident as she warmed to her theme. "Do you understand what that would do to my reputation? To my family's reputation? The Sterling name has meant something in this city for over a century." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. This was the woman I had been planning to propose to, the woman who had spent nearly 2 years integrated into my life, who had met my parents before and never said a single word of criticism or concern. How had I been so completely blind to who she really was underneath that beautiful exterior? "Are you serious right now?" I managed to ask, still hoping that this was some kind of horrible misunderstanding that we could work through together. "Dead serious," she replied without hesitation. "I come from a certain world, Dylan. My friends, my family, our business associates. They all have very specific expectations about the kind of people we associate with. I can't show up to charity galas and board meetings with someone whose father has grease permanently under his fingernails. My father is one of the most honest, hardworking men you'll ever meet, I said, my voice rising with anger and disbelief. My mother has helped raise half the kids in the downtown area, while their actual parents were too busy with their high-powered careers to notice what was happening in their own homes. They're absolutely incredible people. I'm sure they're lovely, Victoria said dismissively, waving her hand as if she was brushing away an annoying insect. But lovely doesn't change the fact that they're working class. I need someone who can move seamlessly in my world without me having to constantly make excuses for their background or worry about what people are thinking. The worst part of this entire devastating conversation wasn't just what Victoria was saying to me. It was how incredibly calm and composed she remained while saying it. She spoke as if she was discussing something as mundane as the weather forecast or what to order for lunch tomorrow. There was absolutely no emotion in her voice, no recognition that she was systematically destroying something that had mattered deeply to both of us for nearly 2 years. There was no acknowledgement of the shared memories we had created together, the intimate conversations we had shared, or the future we had talked about building side by side. It was as if she was reading from a prepared script, delivering a business presentation about why our relationship was no longer a viable investment for her personal brand. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 2 years together and you're throwing it all away because my parents work for a living instead of living off trust funds and family money? "I'm not throwing anything away," she replied with the same maddening calm. "I'm being realistic about what works in the long term and what doesn't. We come from fundamentally different worlds, Dylan. I thought maybe we could bridge that gap somehow, but tonight made it crystal clear that we simply can't." I stood up abruptly, grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, and headed directly for the door. I was too hurt and too angry to continue this conversation without saying something I would definitely regret later. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had fallen in love with, had just revealed herself to be someone completely different. Someone whose values were so fundamentally opposed to everything I believed in that I couldn't even find the words to express my disappointment. "Dylan, wait!" Victoria called after me as I reached for the door handle. I turned back, hoping against hope that maybe she had realized how absolutely awful she sounded, that she wanted to take back the horrible things she had just said and return to being the person I thought she was. "I hope we can still be friends," she said instead, and those words cut deeper than anything else she had said during our entire conversation. I left her apartment without saying another word, walking out into the cold December night, feeling like my entire understanding of our relationship had been built on a foundation of lies. I had spent 2 years believing that what we had was real, that our love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Instead, I had discovered that the woman I wanted to marry had been judging my family and my background the entire time, just waiting for the right moment to reveal her true feelings. The next few weeks were absolutely brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Victoria didn't just break up with me. She completely erased me from her social circle and her life. Mutual friends who had included me in parties and gatherings for almost 2 years suddenly stopped extending invitations to events where Victoria might be present. It was as if I had never existed in their world at all. I heard through the grapevine that she was already dating someone new, Sebastian Hayes, the heir to a hotel fortune whose family name was apparently prestigious enough to meet her exacting standards. Someone whose pedigree was sufficiently impressive that she would never have to make excuses or worry about what her social circle thought of his background. But here's what Victoria didn't know about me, and what she had never bothered to truly understand despite our 2 years together. I had been building data flow systems for 3 full years before I even met her at that tech conference in Boston. What had started as a side project while I was working as a systems architect at a mid-level firm had gradually grown into something genuinely significant in the data management industry. By the time Victoria walked out of my life, we had 12 full-time employees working out of our downtown office space. We had secured contracts with 43 different companies, ranging from mid-size regional businesses to national corporations that needed sophisticated data management solutions. Our revenue had been climbing steadily every quarter for the past 18 months, and we were gaining recognition as an innovative player in our sector. More importantly, for my current situation, we had been in serious acquisition talks with several major players in the tech industry for the better part of 6 months. These weren't casual conversations or preliminary meetings. These were detailed negotiations involving lawyers, accountants, and executive teams discussing specific terms and valuations. I had kept all the details extremely quiet because I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up, including my own, until deals were actually signed and money was in the bank. Victoria knew I had a startup company, and she knew I was passionate about the work we were doing. But she had never understood the true scope of what we were building or its potential value in the marketplace. To her, Dataflow was just my little computer business, something I tinkered with when I wasn't doing whatever she assumed was my real job. 3 weeks after our devastating breakup, Nexatech Industries made a formal offer to acquire Dataflow Systems for $94 million. When I first saw that number written out in the official documentation, I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding something fundamental about the deal structure. Nexatech wasn't just any tech company looking to expand their portfolio. They were a massive player in enterprise software solutions with offices in 12 different countries and annual revenue measured in the billions of dollars. They had built their reputation by aggressively acquiring smaller, innovative companies and integrating them into their larger ecosystem of business solutions. The acquisition meant that Dataflow would become Nexatech's new data infrastructure department for their Midwest operations, and I would be taking over as Regional Director of Data Services for the entire region. It was the kind of position that came with serious money, serious responsibility, and serious respect throughout the industry. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy with a small startup. I was a regional executive at a Fortune 500 company. But here's where the story gets truly interesting, and where the universe seemed to be correcting some cosmic injustice. One of Nexatech's subsidiary holdings happened to be Sterling Holdings Real Estate, the very company that had been in Victoria's family for generations. Charles Sterling, Victoria's father who had looked at me like I was temporary help at his daughter's side, had sold his company to Nexatech 2 years earlier as part of their aggressive expansion into commercial real estate management. He had stayed on as regional director of real estate operations, thinking he was set for life with his golden parachute deal and the security of working for such a large, stable corporation. What Charles hadn't anticipated was Nexatech's restructuring plan that would accompany my acquisition. As part of integrating Dataflow into their existing operations, Nexatech was consolidating their regional divisions to improve efficiency and reduce redundancy. Charles's real estate division was being folded directly into my new data services department, effective immediately. This meant that Charles Sterling, the man who had spent 2 years treating me like an inadequate suitor for his precious daughter, would now be reporting directly to me as his immediate supervisor. The irony was so absolutely perfect that it felt like the universe was personally delivering justice for every condescending look, every dismissive comment, and every moment he had made me feel like I wasn't good enough for his family. My first day as regional director was a Monday morning in April, and I walked into Nexatech Industries' impressive downtown headquarters wearing a perfectly tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase, knowing that absolutely everything in my life had changed overnight. The weight of my new responsibilities felt both exciting and surreal as I prepared to meet the team I would now be leading. The executive conference room was packed for my introduction meeting, filled with department heads, regional managers, and team leaders from across our newly integrated operations. Everyone was there to meet their new boss and understand how the restructuring would affect their daily work. Among the faces around the large mahogany table was Charles Sterling, sitting at the far end and reviewing paperwork with what appeared to be nervous concentration. When I walked into that conference room, Charles looked up casually from his documents, then did the most visible double-take I had ever witnessed. I could literally watch his face cycle through about 5 completely different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally something that looked distinctly like fear. "Good morning, everyone," I began, standing confidently at the head of the table where I belonged. "I'm Dylan Chen, your new Regional Director of Data Services. I'm genuinely excited to be working with all of you as we integrate our operations and take Nexatech's Midwest division to the next level of performance and innovation." Charles's face had gone completely pale, and I could see him looking down at his paperwork, then back up at me, as if he couldn't quite process what was happening in front of him. The man who had spent 2 years treating me like an inconvenience was now faced with the reality that I was his direct supervisor. I went around the table systematically, introducing myself to each department head and outlining my background in data management, my vision for our integrated operations, and my expectations for how we would work together moving forward. When I finally reached Charles, I extended my hand with the most professional smile I could manage. "Mr. Sterling," I said, maintaining perfect eye contact. "I look forward to working closely with you. I believe we met briefly a few times in the past. I used to date your daughter, Victoria." I let that information hang in the air for just a moment longer than was strictly necessary. His handshake was weak and clammy, and he could barely make direct eye contact with me. Yes, of course, Dylan," he stammered, his usual confidence completely absent. This is certainly unexpected. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it?" I replied with a smile that was friendly on the surface, but carried deeper meaning that he absolutely understood. The meeting continued with me outlining our new reporting structure, project timelines, and performance expectations for the integrated department. I made sure to emphasize our focus on accountability, measurable results, and strong leadership at every level. Charles sat there like a man watching his own execution. And every time I mentioned words like accountability, results, or leadership expectations, I could see him shrinking further into his chair. After the meeting concluded and everyone else had filed out to return to their respective duties, Charles lingered behind in the conference room, clearly wanting to speak with me privately. His usual commanding presence had been replaced by obvious uncertainty and nervousness. "Dylan," he started, his voice lacking any of the authority I remembered from our previous interactions. "I had no idea you were... Victoria never mentioned that your company was..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Was what, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, gathering my papers with deliberate calm. "Successful? Profitable? Worth nearly 9 figures?" He winced visibly at my directness. "I think there may have been some misunderstandings in the past," he said, clearly hoping to somehow smooth over years of condescension and dismissive treatment. "No misunderstandings," I replied, maintaining my professional tone. "Your daughter made her position very clear to me. She couldn't introduce me to your social circle because my father fixes cars and my mother cleans houses. She needed someone who could move in your world without her having to make excuses for their background." Charles looked like he wanted to crawl under the conference table and disappear completely. The powerful, intimidating man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who clearly understood that the tables had turned in the most dramatic way possible. "Dylan, you have to understand," Charles began, his voice taking on a pleading quality I had never heard before. "Victoria is young, and sometimes she says things without really thinking them through. She doesn't always mean what comes out of her mouth in moments of stress or uncertainty. She seemed pretty clear in her thinking to me," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. "But don't worry, Mr. Sterling. This is strictly business, not personal. I expect the same level of professionalism from you that I expect from all my department heads, nothing more and nothing less." I could see the relief wash over his face as he realized I wasn't planning to fire him on the spot or make his life miserable out of spite. "Your family relationships won't affect your performance reviews in any way," I continued, "as long as you consistently meet your targets and contribute positively to our team's success." Charles nodded quickly, probably grateful that I was being reasonable about the awkward situation we found ourselves in. But I wasn't quite finished with this conversation yet. "Oh, and Mr. Sterling," I added, pausing at the conference room door. "My father still fixes cars and my mother still cleans houses. The difference is that now my father owns 3 successful auto shops in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, and my mother runs her own professional cleaning service with 12 full-time employees." I watched Charles's mouth open and close like a fish out of water as he processed this information. It turns out that when your son becomes a tech executive with a significant amount of capital to invest, you can afford to expand the family businesses in ways you never imagined possible. "I'll see you at our department meeting Thursday morning," I concluded, and walked out of the conference room, leaving Charles to contemplate how dramatically his world had shifted in the span of a single meeting. Word traveled incredibly fast in the wealthy social circles that Victoria moved in. Within a week, everyone who mattered in downtown Chicago's elite society knew that Dylan Chen, the guy Victoria Sterling had dumped for being beneath her social standards, was now her father's boss and one of the youngest regional directors in Nexatech Industries history. The first text message from Victoria came just 2 days after my promotion was announced in the major business journals. "Dylan, I heard about your new position. Congratulations. I always knew you were going to be successful. Hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a few moments, then deleted it without responding. If she had always known I was going to be successful, then why had my parents' occupations been such an insurmountable obstacle to our relationship? The second text arrived 3 days later, slightly more personal in tone. I keep thinking about us and wondering if I made a mistake. I miss what we had together. Delete. The third text came a week after that, and I could sense the desperation beginning to creep into her messages. My father mentioned you're working together now. He says you're doing an amazing job and that everyone respects your leadership. I'm so proud of you. Delete. The texts kept coming with increasing frequency, and I could watch Victoria's strategy evolve as she became more desperate. At first, her messages were casual. Congratulations, small talk, mentions of mutual friends we both knew. Then they gradually became more personal, with Victoria starting to reminisce about specific moments from our relationship and apologizing for how things had ended between us. She began hinting that she had been hasty in her decision to break up with me, suggesting that maybe she hadn't given our relationship the consideration it deserved. I've been thinking about that dinner at your parents' house, one message read. Your mom's beef stew was absolutely incredible. I should have told her that night how much I enjoyed it. Another message referenced our shared social circle. I saw photos from Lisa's wedding last weekend. Remember when we used to talk about what our wedding would be like? I miss those conversations. The messages became increasingly desperate and personal. I miss you, Dylan. I miss us. I miss everything we had together and everything we talked about building. I didn't respond to any of them, but I have to admit there was a certain dark satisfaction in watching her desperation grow as the weeks passed. The woman who had been so confident in her decision to throw away our relationship was now scrambling to undo the damage she had caused. Meanwhile, at work, Charles was walking on eggshells around me every single day. He had become overly formal in all our interactions, excessively polite to the point where it was almost uncomfortable, and clearly terrified that I was going to take some kind of revenge on him for his daughter's behavior and his own past condescension toward me. The truth was that Charles was actually a competent manager when he wasn't being condescending or dismissive. He knew the real estate business inside and out, had strong relationships with clients and vendors, and understood how to get results from his team. When he focused on his work instead of worrying about social hierarchies, he was quite effective at his job. I had absolutely no intention of sabotaging our department's success for personal reasons. That would have been unprofessional and ultimately self-defeating, since my own performance was now tied to the success of everyone reporting to me. But I also didn't go out of my way to make Charles feel comfortable or to pretend that the awkwardness between us didn't exist. During our weekly one-on-one meetings, Charles would consistently try to make small talk, asking about my family or mentioning Victoria in what he probably thought were subtle ways to gauge my feelings. I kept every single conversation strictly focused on business matters and departmental performance. How are the Q2 projections looking, Mr. Sterling? I would ask, cutting through any attempt at personal conversation. Good, very good, he would respond quickly. The downtown portfolio is exceeding our expectations by 12% so far this quarter. Dylan, I hope you know that Victoria has been asking about you quite frequently, he would add, clearly hoping to open some kind of dialogue about his daughter. That's excellent news about the downtown portfolio, I would reply, completely ignoring his mention of Victoria. What about the Southside developments? Are we on track with those timelines? He got the message eventually and stopped trying to bring up personal topics during our professional meetings. 2 months into my new position, Victoria's text messages escalated dramatically in both frequency and desperation. Dylan, please just call me back, one message read. I know I hurt you deeply, but I want to make things right between us. We had something special, and I threw it away for all the wrong reasons. Another message was even more direct. I was wrong about everything. Your parents are wonderful people, and I was an absolute idiot to say otherwise. I love you, and I never stopped loving you. Please give us another chance to build something together. The most telling message came a few days later. My friends keep asking why we're not together anymore, and I don't know what to tell them because I don't have a good answer. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. That last message almost made me laugh out loud. Her friends, the same people who had barely tolerated me when I was dating her, who had looked down on me for not being part of their privileged world, were now probably wondering why she had let go of a tech executive with an 8-figure net worth and a prestigious position at a Fortune 500 company. The irony was absolutely perfect. The social circle that had once judged me for my parents' working-class jobs was now probably questioning Victoria's judgment for walking away from someone who had achieved the kind of success they all claimed to value. 3 months into my new position, Victoria took the bold step of showing up at my office unannounced. I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly budget allocations when my assistant buzzed me on the intercom. Mr. Chen, there's a Victoria Sterling here to see you, she said in her professional tone. She says it's a personal matter and that she doesn't have an appointment. I should have told my assistant to send Victoria away immediately. There was absolutely nothing we needed to discuss, and her showing up at my workplace was crossing a line that should have remained firmly in place. Instead, curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself wondering what she could possibly say that would justify this dramatic gesture. "Send her in," I said, immediately regretting the decision but unable to take it back. Victoria walked into my office looking like she had stepped directly out of a high-end fashion magazine, as she always did. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was perfectly styled without a strand out of place, and she carried an expensive handbag that I recognized from our shopping trips together. But despite her flawless appearance, there was something fundamentally different about her demeanor. She seemed less confident, more uncertain, almost vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. "Dylan," she said, hovering nervously near the door like she wasn't sure she was welcome in my space. "Victoria, this is certainly unexpected," I replied, gesturing toward one of the leather chairs positioned across from my desk. "Please, have a seat." She perched on the edge of the chair, clutching her handbag tightly as if it could provide some kind of emotional support. The woman who had once commanded every room she entered now seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of whatever had brought her to my office. "I know you've been getting my text messages," she began, her voice carrying a tremor I had never heard before. "I have," I confirmed simply. "And you haven't responded to any of them," she continued. "I haven't," I agreed. She took a shaky breath, clearly struggling to find the right words for whatever she had come here to say. "I came here to apologize. Really apologize, not just through a text message that you can delete without thinking about it. What I said that night about your parents, about your background, it was awful and completely inexcusable." I leaned back in my chair, studying her carefully. "It was honest, though. You said what you really thought about my family and where I come from." "No, it wasn't what I really thought," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It was what I thought I was supposed to think. My whole life, I've been surrounded by people who judge others based on money and status and social connections. I got completely caught up in that mindset, and I hurt the best man I've ever known because of it." "The best man you've ever known," I repeated slowly. "Who you couldn't introduce to your social circle." She winced visibly at my words. I know how terrible that sounded. I know how horrible it was to say something like that to someone I claimed to love. But Dylan, I've learned so much about myself these past few months, about what really matters in life and what kind of person I want to be. "Have you?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Or have you learned that I'm worth $94 million now and hold a prestigious position at a Fortune 500 company?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment, and for the first time since she had walked into my office, she looked genuinely flustered and caught off guard. That's not what this is about," she stammered, but her voice lacked any real conviction. "Isn't it?" I pressed, watching her carefully. 6 months ago, you couldn't introduce me to your friends because my father has grease under his fingernails and my mother cleans houses for a living. Now I'm a regional director at a Fortune 500 company with an 8-figure net worth, and suddenly you've had this profound epiphany about what really matters in life. "You're being unfair," she said, but her voice completely lacked conviction, and we both knew she was grasping at straws. "Am I?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Let me ask you something, Victoria, and I want you to be completely honest with me. If I were still living in that tiny apartment in the suburbs, still running a small startup that barely paid the bills, still just the son of a mechanic and a house cleaner, would you be sitting in this office right now?" Victoria opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again without saying a word. I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with some response that would make her look less shallow and materialistic than we both knew she was. But the silence stretched on, and we both understood what her inability to answer immediately told us about her true motivations. "I thought so," I said quietly, my voice carrying more sadness than anger. "Dylan, please," she said, her composure finally starting to crack. "I made a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake that I regret every single day. But people can change, can't they? I can change. I can be better than I was." "Maybe you can change," I replied, considering her words carefully. "But some things, once they're broken, can't be fixed. Some words, once they're spoken, can't be taken back." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands as if they held some answer to the impossible situation she had created for herself. When she finally looked up at me, there were tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I forfeited any right to your forgiveness, but I love you." For just a second, looking at her sitting there so vulnerable and apologetic, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost remembered why I had fallen for her in the first place. Her intelligence, her beauty, the way she could make me laugh, the conversations we used to have about our dreams and our future together. For just a moment, I could see traces of the woman I had wanted to marry. Then I thought about my parents. I thought about my father's genuine pride when he talked about teaching me to change brake pads when I was 13. I thought about my mother's pure joy when she showed Victoria those family photo albums, excited to share memories and stories about the son she was so proud of. I thought about how thrilled they had been to welcome Victoria into our family, only to discover that she thought they were beneath her standards. "I know you think you love me," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "But you don't love me, Victoria. You love the idea of me now that I'm successful enough to meet your social standards. You love the status, the money, the fact that your friends would be impressed instead of judgmental if we were together." "That's not true," she protested weakly. "If it's not true, then why didn't you fight for us 6 months ago?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell your social circle to go to hell if they had a problem with my parents? Why didn't you stand by me when it would have actually mattered, when it would have required real courage and conviction?" She didn't have an answer for that question, and we both knew there wasn't one that would make her look better. "I think you should go," I said, not unkindly but with finality. "And Victoria, please stop texting me. We both need to move on with our lives." She stood up slowly, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "What about us?" she asked desperately. "What about everything we had together, all those memories and plans and dreams we shared?" "What we had was real, at least for me," I replied honestly. "But it wasn't strong enough to survive the truth about who you really are. And that's not something that changes just because my bank account got bigger." After Victoria left my office, I sat alone for a long time, staring out at the downtown Chicago skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out before me, bustling with activity and opportunity, but I felt strangely disconnected from it all. I experienced a complex mix of emotions, sadness for what we had lost, but also a strange sense of relief that this chapter of my life was finally, definitively closed. I suppose this was what people meant when they talked about closure. The text messages stopped completely after that day. Victoria finally got the message that there was no going back, no amount of apologies or declarations of love that could undo the damage she had caused. She understood that some bridges, once burned, simply cannot be rebuilt. 6 months later, I heard through our mutual friends that Victoria was engaged to Sebastian Hayes, the hotel heir she had started dating immediately after our breakup. They were planning what everyone described as a lavish wedding in Lake Forest that was already being featured in 3 different society magazines before it even happened. When the wedding photos were eventually published, I found myself looking at them with a mixture of curiosity and detachment. Victoria looked absolutely beautiful and genuinely happy, surrounded by exactly the kind of people she had always wanted to impress. Wealthy, connected, socially prominent figures who would never question her choice of partner or worry about his family's background. I genuinely hoped she was happy with her decision. Despite everything that had happened between us, I didn't wish her any ill will or unhappiness. As for me, I kept building Dataflow's integration with Nexitech, focusing on expanding our data services division and establishing ourselves as leaders in the Midwest market. I kept working with Charles, who had gradually become less terrified of me and more respectful of our professional relationship. Over time, we developed what I would describe as a solid working partnership based on mutual respect for each other's expertise. And I kept taking care of my parents, which had always been one of my primary motivations for building my career in the first place. My dad's 3 auto shops were absolutely thriving, serving customers throughout Chicago and the surrounding suburbs. He had been able to hire additional mechanics and expand his services in ways he had only dreamed about when I was growing up. My mom's cleaning service had grown into a legitimate business enterprise that included office buildings and commercial properties, employing a dozen people who depended on her for their livelihoods. Every Sunday, I still went to family dinner at the same house on the south side where I had grown up. We sat around the same kitchen table where I had done my homework as a child, sharing the same kinds of stories about my dad's customers and my mom's clients that had filled our conversations for decades. The only real difference was that now my parents didn't worry about my future anymore. They knew their son was going to be just fine in whatever challenges life might bring. And you know what? They were absolutely right about that. I was going to be just fine. Better than fine, actually, because I had learned something incredibly important from the entire experience with Victoria. The people who love you for who you are, when you have nothing, when you're just a guy with a dream in a small startup working out of a rented office space, are the ones worth keeping in your life forever. Everyone else, all the people who only show interest when you become successful enough to enhance their social status, are just along for the ride. They'll disappear the moment your circumstances change, or you no longer serve their purposes. My father still has grease under his fingernails from working on cars, and he's still proud of the honest work he does every day. My mother still takes genuine pride in making other people's homes beautiful and comfortable, treating each client's space like it was her own. And I'm still incredibly proud to be their son, whether I'm worth 8 figures or $8. Some things are more valuable than money, and some standards can't be bought or sold. Victoria learned that lesson too late, but at least she learned it eventually. I hope her new life brings her the happiness and social acceptance she was looking for, even if it came at the cost of something real and meaningful we could have built together. Update. A lot of people have been asking what happened to Charles at work, so I thought I'd provide some additional context about how that relationship evolved over time. Charles is actually doing quite well in his position. Once he got over his initial panic about having to report to me, the guy his daughter had dumped for not being good enough for their family, he turned out to be a solid colleague and a valuable member of our team. We've developed what I would describe as a good professional relationship built on mutual respect for each other's expertise and contributions to the company. He's never brought up Victoria again in any of our conversations, whether they're formal meetings or casual interactions around the office. I think he learned his lesson about judging people based on their backgrounds rather than their character and capabilities. The experience taught him that assumptions about someone's worth based on their family's occupation can be not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. Second update. For those asking if I ever regret not giving Victoria another chance when she came to my office that day, the answer is honestly no, I don't. What Victoria said that night at my parents' house wasn't something she blurted out in anger or frustration. It wasn't a moment of poor judgment or a heat-of-the-moment reaction that she immediately regretted. It was a carefully considered position based on how she really saw the world and where she thought I fit into her vision of her future. My success didn't make me a different person. I was the same guy with the same values and the same family background. The acquisition and my promotion simply revealed who Victoria truly was underneath the surface we had both been so careful to maintain during our relationship. Third update. My parents don't know the full details of what Victoria actually said that night about their occupations and social status. They just know that we broke up because we ultimately weren't compatible and wanted different things from life. I see absolutely no reason to hurt them with the specific details of her cruel comments. They're too good-hearted and genuine to truly understand that kind of cruelty exists in the world. They raised me to judge people by their character and their actions, not by their bank accounts or social connections. And I want to protect them from the knowledge that someone they welcomed into our home with such warmth could harbor such contempt for everything they represent. Some truths are better left unspoken, especially when sharing them would only cause pain to people who don't deserve it. My parents are happy knowing that I'm successful and that I've found my way in life. That's all they need to know, and it's all that really matters in the end.